Hello again. This week I'm going to go over how to actually cut out the pattern. So have your pattern, and as we talked about last week, you locate the directions, and once you fold them out in there, once again we're going to be doing shirt B, and it says in the directions right down here, as I talked about last week, which parts we need for top B, which will be 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which are the front and back, both front and back facings, and the sleeve. Alright, then you take your fabric, inner facing, which it'll say on the back of the packet if you need when you're cutting out your fabrics. It'll have the suggested fabrics, and it'll also say how much fusible interfacing you need for each size. So grab that, your pins, your nice fabric scissors, and chalk if you have it, and to move to your cutting surface. I'll actually be doing this on the kitchen floor because I don't have a nice big cutting counter, but someday. Alright, so we've located the pieces. I have 8 and 9 here, which are the front and back, 10 and 11 over here, which are the neck facings, and 12, the sleeve. So as you can see, some of these have already been cut out from their full sheets where I used a different part of the pattern, but these specific pieces haven't been cut themselves, so we're going to get to do that together today. Also, they're still quite folded. And one of the first things to do just to make your life easier is iron the pattern. So I have the iron heating up here on a really low setting, and the pattern piece is right beside me. You can do this after you've cut the pieces out. Honestly, I think it's a lot easier to do so beforehand, as long as you can wrangle the sheets. And that way you're not worried about it folding under while you're trying to cut through it, or a wrinkle interfering with the actual size the pattern piece is supposed to be. So please ignore my dirty iron cover. It's something I've been needing to replace for quite a while. It's threadbare and everything, but a project for another time. Did the neck facings. You just continue pressing all of the pieces lightly, working out those folds until everything is flat. Now that everything's flat, it is almost time to cut. You may notice there are a lot of markings on these patterns, and we went over some of them, such as the grain line, when we were looking through the pattern instructions, but there's actually another glossary printed on the pattern. I'm just going to go over that really quickly, and I'll mention it again as we see them when cutting out. So this little circle in the cross indicates bust line, waistline, or bicep, so that's where the body curves are. The lengthen or shorten adjustments are lines that go all the way across, and they'll actually say that on the pattern as well. It says to lengthen, slash between adjustment lines, spread amount as needed, keeping edges parallel. To shorten, crease along adjustment line, make a fold half the amount needed. I'll demonstrate at the very least how to shorten on the pattern and explain how to lengthen without those exact words. It does say to transfer all the tissue markings to fabric before removing the pattern. This is why I mentioned the chalk earlier. Seam lines are 5/8 on this pattern and most pattern. Button marking is indicated with an X. Buttonhole marking is indicated with this little I that looks like a buttonhole, actually. And symbols will be, little circles, triangles, diamonds, squares, and that's for matching seams and construction details, which again, I'll go over as we actually cut them out. So again, we locate those measurements. These guys were actually inside the pattern. Many of them are going to be on the back side of the pattern, as discussed in part 1. We find our size. I'm going to be cutting out the extra large. Now, this is really easy to find on the pattern because it's the big outside line, as you can see indicated here. Here's the extra large, there's the large, medium, small, extra small. And to help you follow those lines around corners, the extra large is a bold line. Large is big dashes. Medium is like a dash dot, dash dot. Small is very long dashes, and extra small is very long dots. And they'll see those indications repeated again throughout the pattern. I'm just going to go in order. Let's pick up your shears. For this part, we're just following those lines. So you can see here are some of those markings that we talked about. Right now, just cut right beside them, keep following the line. When we get to the fabric, that is when we'll actually transfer those markings, and I'll talk about different methods for doing so. You want to stay as close to on the line as you possibly can. I like to cut up one side and then the other. Everybody has their own way of doing it. Right here, you can see it says center fold. And we talked about that in the last video when we went over instructions. That means this straight line of the pattern is going to sit on the fold of the fabric. Just follow that curve up. And clip across the top. All right, set that aside. Move on to the next piece. When you get pieces like this that are just scrap, as long as they don't have any other small markings on them, you can just throw them away. Around curves is where you have to be very careful. So, as you can see, the extra large comes all the way up here, but this is where those different dashed lines are going to be important, because the large curves around, intersects with the medium, comes up here, and it looks like it says extra large there. That's why you really want to follow those lines, because it's just indicating this marking that we will be using when we transfer to the fabric. Extra small has that same problem where it comes up. It looks like it may continue on to the medium, but it's actually right here. That looks like it says small. It's the extra small. Just follow whatever the line marking is. So the solid line, the medium dashes, the dash dot, etc., as we went over earlier. Make sure you cut off the bottom as well. If you want to leave it long, you can. It's just going to mean more hemming, but that's exactly what you do if you need to lengthen the bottom of a pattern. But most of the time for lengthening, we're going to be looking at this line right here, which they mentioned earlier. So this is the lengthen and shorten line, and it says, you know, fold for petite. So all you would do is pick up there, fold it over, press it just like that, tape it down, and when you get to cutting out your fabric, you're working with a slightly shorter piece. For lengthening it, we would cut in between that double line there, and you would measure how much longer do you need it to be. So for example, right up here, it says this neckline is 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters below the base of neck. So if you put that up to the base of your neck and you measure with your ruler or just using the pattern piece holding it there, and you know you want this a little past your hips, and you're like, oh no, it's only coming to right on my hip. what you do at that point is measure how much farther down, so let's say you want 2 inches more down. After you cut this out, you move it 2 inches down. Some people just like to pin them together. I say get a piece of wrapping paper or tissue paper, tape both sides to the tissue paper 2 inches apart from each other. Make sure you're measuring, make sure you keep them parallel so you're not twisting the pattern. And that's just how you'd lengthen and shorten. Again, on the bottom of the sleeve here, we have that same little problem with slightly overlapping lines. So the extra large is just from that corner straight across. As you can see, the large is just slightly lower, medium slightly lower, that sort of thing. So by the time you get to the small, your corner is a few millimeters lower. It's not a huge deal if you don't cut it just perfectly, but that little bit of curve is what helps it stay straight when the sleeve is wrapped around your wrist. Otherwise, it will point on one side. So since we're doing the extra large, we follow it from the furthest point out. Whoop. There we go. We're going to see that again here, where the small is on a slightly different curve. Same with the next one, same with the next one. So when we cut out the extra large, we're actually going to be cutting off a little bit of the small, but it doesn't matter as long as you're only making it for yourself. And at this point, because this is a beginner series, you should probably only be making it for one person, either, you know, yourself or your partner, your child, whoever you measured for. That is all the pieces that we were told to cut out for this top. They're now cut out of the pattern, and the next part is to cut them out of the fabric. Okay, so now we have all our pattern pieces out. We can come back here to the instructions and look at top B, how they want it to be laid out. So I have a 45 roughly inch fabric. I say roughly because it is a snuggle flannel. They tend to be about 42 inches because they don't count the selvage edge, and then they shrink a little when you wash them. That is why you always want to pre-wash and then iron your fabric, which I already did. So here what it's recommending is to start out by laying 8, which is our front piece, against the fabric while it's folded hot dog ways. Cut that out. And then you're going to flip the fabric. So here the selvage edge was here, now the selvage edge is there. We're going to fold both in and cut out 9, 10, and 11. And then unfold the last bit of fabric to get both of the sleeves out of it. This is what they're recommending. I'm going to attempt to do it that way today, but most of the time I just get, you know, an extra ½ yard of fabric over what is recommended so that I have a little more wiggle room to play with it and I don't have to cut these lines so close. It is also going to say down here to cut again 10 and 11 out of our interfacing, and it recommends just fold it, place them together, cut it out. Alrighty, it's time to actually cut out the fabric. We've got our pins. Mine are in a little pin cushion that's self-made with a tuna can. My mom actually helped me make it a long time ago. It's great. Our cutting scissors. These ones are for fabric. I did also use them to cut out the pattern. You can use, you know, more basic craft scissors, paper scissors to do that. I just like that it gets me a really clean line and doesn't leave any burrs or anything like that around the edges. It does mean I need to get these sharpened a little more often though. And chalk. I've got a nice mechanical chalk pencil. It releases the chalk right there, but any tailor's chalk will do. You can pick some up at a local fabric supply store. So one of the first things that I did that's a little different than what the pattern recommended is I like having my bottom edge right next to the bottom edge of the fabric. Not exactly on it because it's a bit of a mess, but it just gives me a little more usable fabric up towards the top there than if it was flipped the other way. And we're going to start to pin this down. So here's the fold line, and that's the center of the body. I always start pinning on anything that has a fold. You want to hold it down gently. I am an overpinner, both in pattern and when sewing. I pin way more often than is strictly necessary, but it just gives me peace of mind. If you have a really delicate fabric, you've got a couple of options that don't involve pinning. You can actually trace the pattern with chalk, and you can use pattern weights, which are just basically little coins that are nice and heavy that you set down there that stops it from sliding all over on your fabric. I go to corners next, and since we're no longer on that edge here, you now want to make sure your needle is inside that edge so that when it's done, the head of it isn't poking out on any side, and you don't have to worry about it when you come to the actual cutting portion. Now that the corners are all pinned, I like to go back through and pin horizontally to anything like these curves here. Just make sure it stays flat as I have to cut around it. Okay, cutting time. Grab your scissors and we just start cutting right up through here. Well, we've run into a notch. Options. You can take your chalk and mark where that was located on the fabric, and that's what we're going to do when we hit any of those inside markings, like the circles on the sleeve. We'll come to that in a moment. You can also physically cut that notch into your fabric, and because we're working with a 5/8 seam allowance, that's going to be on the inside of the garment and get, how do I put this, eliminated when you're finishing your seams anywhere. It won't be there anymore. You'll trim that off or you'll fold it in. You don't have to worry about it. I like to actually notch towards the outside, so I just cut a little triangle like that. That helps me keep my markings up. Just do that same thing anytime you come to another one of those. And what that's going to do is this marking will match up with another notch on, let's see, for this one, that's neckline, it will be on the facing. So you can line them up, and then you'll make sure that it's actually all laying properly. And it'll talk about that in the pattern as well. When you come to one like this over here, where it's doubled, you can either indicate that again by doing 2 lines with the chalk, just marking both of them. You can cut in. I like, because I'm cutting towards the outside, to just make a bigger notch that encompasses both of them. And that's going to make things clear when you're lining up sides to sides which marking you're working with. Okay, and then we just take off the bottom here. And that piece is cut out. It's free floating. You could, at this point, because you have transferred all of your markings here, you could actually take the pattern piece and separate it from your cutout fabric. I like to leave them together until I'm actually working with them, just because sometimes I can't do all of my project at once, and I may come back to it a while later and then I'm like, oh, is this the front or the back? Some of these pieces it's hard to tell. So I just like to keep them together until I've actually sewn it. So unfortunately, I bought this fabric back towards the New Year's, intending it for shorts. And I did not get enough extra to account for the fact that it is a directional pattern as well. All of the otters are facing one way. So in order to cut it according to the diagram on our directions here, it would want me to turn that the other way to get the sides and the facings cut out so I'd have enough left over for the sleeves. And I don't really want the otters to be swimming sideways all along the back. So I'm going to finish cutting out the back and the facings in a similar manner to how we did the front, with it just hot dog folded, and we'll pin it against everything like that. And then I'm going to be doing the sleeves in a contrasting fabric. Let's get to cutting. I forgot to put the notch here, so I'm going to use the marking method and make sure I hit both sides. Sometimes it happens, but that's why we've got multiple ways to do this, and also why I don't separate them from their pattern pieces until I'm in the sewing process. This one is another one of those where it has a marking. Well, I guess actually it's our first one where it has a marking on the inside. And you just place your chalk underneath it, and you can see there's a little dot there. You can also push a pin straight up and down through it. You can see like that. And that way it's really easy to find where you're supposed to mark that on the other side. You can also do that when you're placing your pattern pieces together. Just push a pin straight through, and that'll help you get all the markings lined up. So here we come to that big side notch that we did on the other one. Now you know that's where the front and backs meet. Same thing, this will help you differentiate between the front of the sleeve and the back of the sleeve, because the front only had a single notch and the back has a double. Again, we talked about earlier how this was a marking and it says extra large all the way down there instead of up here, and that could be a little confusing. That's because it is again a marking to help you line up the facings on the inside. I'm just going to pin that back again so it all stays together. Alrighty, and I'm going to get the fabric out for the sleeves now. This is the contrasting fabric that I will be using for the sleeves. It's kind of a gray marble-ish. It's what I had on hand that was already ready to be worked up. And I think it's almost the right color to match the otters. The otters are a little more brown, but I'm not too mad about that. Now, this does have a grain line, this pattern piece here. The other ones did not, because they were all cut on the fold, which is in itself a grain line, so everything was good there. This one, you want to make sure that that grain line is what is matched perpendicular to the selvage. Because I have that matched up, I'm just going to put a pin through it, and that'll hold it in place so it won't twist while I'm pinning the rest of the pattern. I have actually doubled this as well because I have a lot of this extra fabric, so I only have to cut through the sleeve pattern once instead of what you would normally have to do with 45s, where you'd have to open them up with the 45 wides, where you'd have to open them up, lay the sleeves next to each other and cut like that. Because at the top of the sleeve here, it is over the 22 inches of working space that you have when you hot dog fold 45 wide fabric. But I have enough fabric to do a hamburger fold here, so it's not a problem. All right, I have all the corners pinned, and once again, just go through and make sure all the rest of them get pinned down. If you skip this step and you don't pin down all the sides, one of the things that can happen is as you're cutting, you'll start shifting the pattern over like that, and then it'll be too small or curved incorrectly, and it'll just make matching it up and sewing that much more difficult. Alrighty, snip snip. And these notches are actually going to line up with each other when you're sewing the sleeve. This is where that double notch that I mentioned comes into play from the back. So you know, oh, this is the back side of the sleeve. This one over here, the single notch, will match up with the front of the garment. All right, and don't forget to mark again this center right here, and that is going to be really important because you have to gather sleeves a little bit to give them enough fullness to move around the shoulder, and you want to be able to know where the center of your sleeve is. Don't forget to trim off the bottom. We need to cut the facings out of our iron-on interfacing as well. Now you're just going to do that the exact same way as you did with the fabric, except for you don't want to iron this stuff first because it's fusible and it will just fuse to your ironing board. You do that after you'll be ironing this to these actual facings here. I'm just trying to make sure I don't waste any, so I'm getting it so the fold is just as big as I need it for this piece. That will do. Okay, so I am going to unpin it from our otter fabric here. I'm going to set the fabric aside because I'm going to stack these all together in a moment. I'm going to do the same with our other facing here. You may notice that 11 is upside down. Because it's mirrored, it doesn't actually matter. And in the diagram on the pattern, this is how they showed to do it as well, just so you're wasting less fabric in between the two facings that you're cutting out. And then I just place them together, and I'll set them in my work area like that so they stay together until I've actually fused them on. All right, you have all your pieces cut out. What you really do from there is just follow the directions as we went over last week. It'll walk you through it. If you have any questions or if you're really interested, comment down below and I will actually sew along with this pattern and record that as well. That's all for this series, unless you guys want that, so bye-bye.